Thank you for watching this Last Mile Profits video.
FedEx is reported to be planning to hive off its freight division. Does this really make strategic sense? Carry on watching to find out more.
Last Mile Profits is brought to you by Parcel Pending by Quadient.
Gary, FedEx is apparently considering hiving off FedEx Freight from the core express business. I think the general idea is that this will increase shareholder value because both teams are going to be more focused on their respective areas. FedEx Express has got a few challenges. They're still, I think, trying to put together the bits and pieces from the TNT merger, which perhaps wasn't the most successful. They're very dependent. If I remember correctly, something like 70% of their revenue is US based. And I think, the idea is it's going to be more manageable, more focused, easier to monitor. And for that reason, it's going to add several billion. I can't remember the figure, but they did state a figure that they expected to get because of it. What's your take, Gary?
Well, I've tried to work with FedEx for years, and sometimes it's been very successful. And they're very responsive, and sometimes it's very difficult to get any kind of traction or change within the organization because it's so huge. You hear these scary stories that if you stand in Fifth Avenue and you ship something by FedEx to Sixth Avenue, it will probably go to Memphis and back. Go back to the hub and come back out again. Now, I think in New York they've kind of got it sorted, but even relatively short journeys for Express, everything goes to Memphis, everything comes back. So I think there are huge challenges. Organizationally, they've been structured in a very specific way. So I don't envy the task of anybody that's going to hive off the freight business and keep it separate while still trying to bring the express business back into the level of profitability that it really wants. Big task.
Do I remember correctly that a couple of years ago, UPS actually did that? They split the freight business. So it seems to be something that's been done before. My own concern is this, whereas I agree that big is not always best, and DHL learned that a few years ago. But is it not a little bit of, saying rather than focusing on the core issues, because there are a lot of core issues to deal with, what do? You do a split, you do a rebrand. And although, of course, it's easier to focus within a smaller organization on those changes, but I think that's the real issue. And, Gary, for a long time now, I've called FedEx and UPS legacy carriers because for me, my old example was Kodak didn't really want to accept that the world was going digital. My new example is German automakers didn't really feel the need to change from combustion engine technology. They kept perfecting that when the world started moving to electric. And I think it's a little bit the same with FedEx and UPS, who actually were the guys who really changed and innovated the last mile. Or am I being unfair?
I think they've got a complicated history. I mean, they very bravely terminated their contract with Amazon. They were Amazon's biggest carrier for a long time. They saw the threat of Amazon logistics come along and they just cut them off at the knees. They terminated the contract. They then started building their own e-commerce strategy, and that has taken some time to get big. I was talking to them in my previous job, and they were sort of launching the B2C e-commerce transporters in a big way, and they're still to make big roads into that. And as you say, they're utterly dependent on the US, where 70% of their business is done. You mentioned the TNT integration. I think that's a mixed bag as well. Just like you said, some countries I think it's been seamless. There are other countries in Europe where, a bit like when DHL were part of Securica and stuff in the UK, where guys are coming in the morning, turning two computers on side by side to watch the traffic going through the network because they haven't quite got the crossover. UPS are much better at that, but I'm not sure what effect it will have if you can really create. We always talk about 2 + 2 = 5. If you've got 4 and you split it into 2 + 2, is it going to be 2 + 1 afterwards? Is it going to be 2 + 3? How is that net value for the shareholder going to increase?
My personal view is that, yes, they can do that. And perhaps it will mean that they can have better strategies in each organization. But at the end of the day, I would focus more on understanding e-commerce, out of home, where that fits in, making sure that their processes, their technology is able to deal with that change. Because if they do that, I think that is the sort of the recipe that will get them back into positive trend spiral going upwards, of course. And I reckon that this is the big thing that they have to deal with, rather than, in my view, focusing on secondary matters, looking at, okay, what has Amazon Logistics done in the US? What have the successful players in Europe and in other places done? and how they need to change. Because honestly, whereas 70s, the 80s, FedEx was the company that was changing everything. For me, I haven't seen that for a long, long time.
No, and there are dozens of these startup carriers in the States now, but basically down both coasts, East Coast and West Coast, there is organizations that are delivering green. They're delivering by electric bike, electric scooters. They're sort of going, final yard rather than final mile. They're really focused on that kind of green delivery piece and picking up volume because of it. And because they're small and nimble and flexible, I think one of them has recently been valued at $1 billion. It's a genuine unicorn in this delivery space, and their agility and ability to chip ice cubes off the iceberg of FedEx perhaps and of UPS is fascinating as well. One day one of them's going to get some serious traction and become a proper number 3 player in the US.
Well, if we take Europe, look at Vinted, who created their own last mile division from nowhere, and they're now one of the biggest shippers in most of their core markets in Europe. So theoretically, that could happen in the US. Let's observe. I think we're aligned in the fact that in itself, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not going to be the solution to all of their issues. They have to actually take a step back, perhaps, and reinvent themselves a bit. But it would be great to have comments from our viewers. Maybe people closer to the US will have something to add. And also, as usual, if you've enjoyed the video, please click like and subscribe because it helps keep these videos free for you.
Last Mile Profits is brought to you by Parcel Pending by Quadient.